Welcome to a very special live episode of Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Tuesday, December 24th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Oregon game in the Rose Bowl in just 8 days. The game against Michigan in 340 days. Just got a chance to talk to Ryan Day, head coach of Ohio State, and Dan Lanning, head coach of Oregon, about that Rose Bowl, some of the big storylines we'll be talking about in the lead up to that game, and much more. Going to be breaking that all down with my buddy Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. Tony, I think my big first takeaway is that is the most words I have ever heard Dan Lanning say. He is typically a man of very few words. We spent like an hour with him at Big Ten Media Days, and it was like, I don't think he talked for more than 12 seconds about anything. So I don't know, either he's getting better at this, or he's more comfortable with this, or he just wants to, now that he's on a bigger stage, wants to have everyone know that, yes, he can string 3 sentences together.
Well, yeah, they weren't all 3 sentences. Some were just 1 or 2, but it was a little more conversational, conversant for Dan Lanning. I don't know how much we necessarily learned. Maybe he's getting better at coach speak. That's why he can talk more. Like, that's why he chooses to talk more, because he can say more words while saying less. So it's like, yeah, why not explore the room with all of this nothingness? But I mean, get used to it. I guess we'll have it 1 or 2 more times, and then next year and the year after and the year after that, until he's, I guess, at Georgia. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and there was plenty to talk about today, certainly with Lanning and with Ryan Day, and there were some interesting answers, and there were certainly some recurring themes that we heard a lot about. One of them was, hey, did you guys know you played a couple months ago? Big if true. This is the second time Ohio State has played Oregon this year, and Oregon just did this a year ago. They played Washington twice. This year, this is the first time Ohio State's played a team twice in one season, as far as I can remember, back to UCLA in 1975. I can't remember it happening since then, but it has been, this is
Wisconsin.
A new thing for Ohio. Oh, yeah, Wisconsin. Sorry, Wisconsin in 2019. That's right. Sorry. So it has been a minute for Ohio State. It has been not quite as much time for Oregon, but how different, how does that change things when you're trying to prepare for a team you've already played? That was sort of one of the big recurring questions. Hey, do you kind of look at what went well the first time and just do that again? Do you look at what's happened since these teams have played? Because they played on October 12th. It's been a while. What's the approach from the coaches?
I like Dan Lanning. He's like, well, you got enough time, so you look at everything. You look at the last game. You look at what went well, what didn't. You look at how both teams have changed and what those changes how they would impact against each other now, and where you've gotten good, where you've gotten worse. I liked also what Ryan Day said. He's like, well, you still have overage, what they call overage from that game, the plays that they put in the playbook that they didn't, or put in the game plan that they didn't use. And they put them in for a reason, because they thought they would work in that game. And so you've still got those that you haven't necessarily shown, but also now you got to see what they are now and what you are now. Oregon did not have Jordan Birch, their star defensive end, in that game. They will now. And so how do you operate? How much does he change your game plan? How much does that impact it? Even though they went into that game planning for Birch to play, I would assume, and game planning for him to play. So the game plan won't necessarily change too much, but the talent that you're playing against will. So it is interesting how much stock do you put into the previous game? You look at what worked, you look at what didn't, and if it didn't work, you could probably just throw that one in the bonfire.
Yeah, they had some interesting phrases that I haven't heard him use before. Overage, as you mentioned, was one where it's the stuff, as you said, that you had planned for the first time and you didn't use, or you had planned for other games recently and you didn't use, where it's practiced, it's kind of ready to go, and you can just sort of take it off the shelf. But he also said you got to pack what you need. So
yes,
obviously not an overpacker, Ryan Day. It's like, yeah, you have the whole, we talk to Jim Knowles about this all the time, because he talks about, what do you have how much of your book have you put in, and how much do you have in your toolbox? And you want to balance, hey, you want to have a lot of different things you could do without overloading these guys, because you don't have the amount of practice time, the amount of meeting time, the amount of everything that an NFL team has. So you have to be a little more strategic about what you're trying to do. And you're also trying to balance, you pack what you need, because you might need to pack again for the Cotton Bowl. One of these teams is going to have to pack again for the Cotton Bowl after the Rose Bowl. So you don't want to, use everything you got, empty the bag. One of the things that was a big storyline going into the Tennessee game, and then a big storyline during the Tennessee game, and now after the Tennessee game, is the Ohio State offensive line. how those guys played. Ryan Day seemed like, really not a surprise after you were up 42-10 against Tennessee in the fourth quarter. Ryan Day, though, was pretty happy with what he saw out of Luke Montgomery, who he was specifically asked about, but also Austin Sierreveld and Tager Shabola, who were also in that guard mix, guys who've started before and have played against Oregon before.
Yeah, and Ryan talked about the Luke Montgomery. He liked the energy he played in the 30 some snaps that he was out there. You could feel him. And not that anybody was perfect, but the energy that they brought, the physicality that they brought, and how the rotating those three guys allowed them all to play fast and to play consistently hard and fast while they were in there, because they would get a breather. They'd get an opportunity to see, where they went wrong, where they went right. And that fixes you, that builds your confidence. Like, okay, if I keep doing this, I'll just do more of this, and I'll stop doing this. So you get that feedback, and you get to watch it happen while you're on the sidelines, and you're seeing what you need to do and what you need to do better. And then the next time you get out there, you do it. And so that does build your confidence. Now, you still got to be able to operate and execute, and the cohesion on the offensive line needs to be there. I think the interesting thing with the game plan against Tennessee was that you weren't always working as five, the offensive line. You're doing the gap schemes, you're doing some counters, so you're working as two or three rather than five, which I think helps that cohesiveness when you don't have to be, it's not four guys zone blocking, at the line of scrimmage type of thing. So the cohesion isn't necessarily as important. It's just important to go get your guy or to take your guy away from the play. So I think they operated well with that understanding that you're probably not going to have superb cohesion, but also you don't need to if you're moving guys all over the place. You just need them to operate. And if they don't, it's okay at times, because that defender is nowhere near the play.
Yeah, that was an interesting answer from Ryan Day about the gap schemes and how they use them and why they worked so well for them. Because we talk all the time about the importance of those five offensive linemen gelling and playing together and moving as one and all that kind of stuff. And then if you are in the middle of the week with a playoff game on deck a couple days later and you're still not sure who those five are going to be, well, that makes it a little harder for those five to gel. But the gap schemes definitely, as you say, sort of mitigated some of those concerns. They talked about how they were able to get some double teams inside, really push guys off the line. You saw that on, I think it was one of the Quinshon Judkins touchdown runs where they highlighted it on the broadcast, where you had, I think it was Tager Shabola and Josh Fryer just pile driving some poor Tennessee defensive lineman 5 yards deep in the end zone. And then being able to have those pullers get to the second level, clean up some of the linebackers. And then he also talked about how hard the backs were running behind them, and then how the threat of the wide receivers outside really helped keep some of those guys out of the box, help with numbers a little bit. And you put all that stuff together, it's like, yeah, makes sense why Ohio State was able to run the ball better than we thought. Now they've put all that on film. Now Oregon has a few days to try and digest that as they're adapting their game plan for this game a little bit. One of the other things they're going to have to account for is Will Howard, who played probably his single best game as a Buckeye on Saturday night. Over 300 yards passing, 37 yards rushing, couple touchdowns, really 83% completions. That was a fantastic performance against a pretty good Tennessee defense. So now the question for Dan Lanning is, okay, how much has Will Howard changed and evolved since the last time you saw him, when he also had a pretty decent day against Oregon? And for Ryan Day, he was asked about something that Chip Kelly mentioned after the game on Saturday night about how Chip Kelly will start talking about a play, or like calling a play, and Will Howard, Chip Kelly gets 2 words out, and Will Howard goes, yeah, okay, got it, and knows, hey, I know where you're going with this. We're on the same page, all good.
Yeah, and Will Howard even talked about it after the game, even based on like formation that they call it. He'll basically know what play is coming, and then you get the first couple of words, and they're finishing each other's sentences, and that happens in practice and it happens in the games. And so when you've got that command of the playbook. But even more importantly, as Ryan Day said, the hows and the whys. Why and what is the purpose of this play? Not just, where's everybody going? What is the purpose of it? What are you trying to attack, and why are you trying to attack it? And so when you know all that, you can anticipate what play is coming. And you've got the situational awareness. It's second and 7. I generally know this batch of plays that we get into. And so once you start hearing one, or even knowing the defense that you're playing, so many of these quarterbacks can call their own games if they needed to. And probably I wonder how often like Will is calling it in his own head in terms of like, this is what I would do. Or do you turn that part of your brain off? I think that's a good question for him. Maybe one of us should ask him. But when you're operating like that and you have an understanding offense can do what it should do in this situation, and then you start to hear it from the coordinator, you start to hear it from Chip, and it's like, okay, got it, and you go from there. The understanding is key. Like the memorization, Will Howard talked about, he's always been able to memorize stuff. It's the understanding to where it's no longer memorization, it's knowledge, and it's not just rote, it's understanding.
Yeah, you're not just repeating what has been said to you. You're able to teach the class if needed.
Mm-hmm.
That's when they say you've got mastery, when you can get up in front of the class and teach it. Will Howard could definitely teach in a class on the Ohio State offense at this point. And Dillon Gabriel on Oregon side, almost certainly in the same boat. Those two guys were both veteran quarterbacks from the Big 12. They talked earlier the year about the fact that they know each other. They're both new in this conference. They're both new in these teams, but they know each other from their Big 12 days. Gabriel at Oklahoma and Will Howard at Kansas State. Dillon Gabriel's kind of in that same boat where they ask him to do a lot, and he has done all of it very, very effectively this year. Heisman finalist, statistically a really dynamite quarterback. And he presents a lot of the same threats that Nico Iamaleava did last week for Ohio State when they're playing Tennessee. But Dillon Gabriel is just kind of, he's the Nico Iamaleava with, he comes back from the future and says to Iamaleava, hey, let me tell you all that I've learned over my many years of college football. He's not as tall, but he presents a lot of the same challenges. And one of those challenges is running the ball, how well he can run the ball and extend plays. You and I are doing some rewatches of some of the other Oregon games. We'll have shows on that coming up this week for you on our YouTube channel, on your podcast platforms of choice, in the Buckeye Weekly podcast feed. But Dan Lanning was asked about the importance of Dillon Gabriel and just his ability to use his legs to extend plays and pick up some first downs, and just his maturity, the fact that he's seen it all before. He doesn't freak out. Nothing is new. Nothing is confusing. It's just kind of like whatever it is. Yeah, sure. I've seen this before. I know what to do.
Well, and he's seen a lot before. So, but in this offense, and it's just 1 year in, but he understands it. He understands defenses and the way they will attack him. But you look at what he's done this year: rushed for 192 yards. His two best games on the ground, his two highest output games on the ground, both against OSU. 64 yards against Oregon State, 32 yards against Ohio State. And he had a 29-yarder or something like that for the touchdown. I forget how long it was. But he's also looking to throw the ball when he's running around, but he will also get down, and he's not afraid to run. He's not, as you said, he's not a big guy, but he's a smart runner. And Lanning said he will understand quickly whether to pull it down or not. So he's just really a really smart guy and has no problem if it's not there right away, or there's a botched snap or there's a mistake, he'll just run upfield and get what he can and get down. But he is a mobile guy, and he does keep plays alive. And rewatching this Wisconsin game, we don't need to talk about it too much here, but there'll be a guy coming clean off the edge and trying to chase him and not catching him, and he's just keeping his distance. And now he can either turn it upfield or he could throw it. And he's a good decision maker. And he does not have the strongest arm. Did it matter the first time these two teams played? No, it certainly did not, because as long as you're accurate downfield, doesn't really matter if you're just throwing against one-on-ones and there are no safeties trying to help you out. But getting pressure on him is still going to be key. He can do something after that, but at least you're forcing the action. And the way that Ryan Day is talking about, they want to be aggressive in all three phases, it doesn't seem like that would be like, let's be aggressive on defense, except passive when we get after Dillon Gabriel. I don't think that's the plan either.
Probably not. And we can get much more into the game plan later in the week. I'm already trying to talk to Ross Fulton about figuring out when we're going to do those sort of schematic breakdown shows and what he thinks Ohio State's game plan should be against Oregon. This one from Jeff in the comments saying, no, he knows Denzel Burke's going to be looking for his redemption. And, Burke certainly did not have a great game in the first game against Oregon, but a lot has changed with the Ohio State defense. That sort of spurred a lot of change with the Ohio State defense, that first Oregon game. And Ryan Day said, this is not about seeking redemption for the first game. This is not, they're not spending all week rubbing their hands together and saying, aha, finally time for revenge. It's a bunch of stuff that's much more mundane than that.
Yeah, it's all mundane. It's execution. It's the putting the right game plan together against your opponent and maximizing your strengths, minimizing your weaknesses. It's all, Tom, as I say, tackling and blocking is the key. In terms of the Denzel Burke thing, I know he got a ton of grief for that game. I still chalk most of that up to the game plan. We went into that game talking all week long about how Oregon has not really thrown deep, and when they have, it's not been accurate. So they throw to the sticks, they try to get first downs, and Ohio State's defense, so much of it just stopped at the sticks, and Oregon didn't, and Ohio State paid the price for that. I'm expecting a much different game plan this time around, which means, Tom, the sticks will be open. Have fun with that.
That was the second time in the span of about 5 Ohio State games that we watched a bunch of an opponent's previous games and went, well, here's what they don't do. They don't throw the ball downfield. And then Michigan did that in, I guess that was 2022's Michigan game, not 2023. But yet, Michigan, we had that conversation before the Michigan game in 2022, and then they broke that tendency very strongly. And Oregon did the same thing against Ohio State this year, really got away from that tendency. And then, watching some of the games since then, they're still shooting the ball downfield some, but it's still most of the passing game closer to the sticks. We will continue that conversation a little later on in the week. One guy you can get him the ball at the sticks, you can get him the ball deep. You throw him the ball wherever he is, and something cool is probably about to happen. Jeremiah Smith, Ryan Day was asked about what stands out, what's maybe something that people don't appreciate about Jeremiah Smith, and I was all ready for I was starting to just type out his work ethic, all the studies that nope. Ryan Day had a very different answer, which is I was really surprised by.
Yeah, probably his size is what Ryan Day said, and talked about how just big he is physically. And it's interesting because that's the first thing anybody notices, but then you watch him play, and you start to notice everything else. Like he's just the ball skills, all the speed. You see that. Ryan Day and all of the teammates and coaches have talked about the off-field stuff of Jeremiah, the preparation, the maturity. Like all of this is now old hat, and he's thrown that out there for so long that maybe we've kind of gone full circle here. And the most overlooked quality that Jeremiah Smith has is he's big and he's strong and he's a physical guy, because you look at him and it's like this ballet dancer is strong as hell. Like you may not know that, and you just see the dancing and the all of that stuff and the fluidity, but he's big and he's strong. And I think that was just a reminder, like, while he is making all of these plays and he's fast and he looks fast, don't forget that he's also 6'3", 6'4", 210 pounds or whatever. And is, when you stand next to him, it's like, okay. Like he is a big receiver. I remember, Tom, many, many years ago, the first time I saw David Boston on the field, I was like, he looks like a tight end, and he was 6'3", 205 listed. And Jeremiah Smith is bigger than that. And now he just looks like, well, that's what androids and robots are supposed to look like on the football field.
Yeah, and he continued to present matchup issues for just about every corner he goes up against. We'll see how well Oregon can defend him this time. He had a nice game against Oregon the first time. Obviously, all anyone's going to remember about that game was that last throw that they had to him, or the last couple throws that they had to him. One with the offensive pass interference call, another one that they threw to him that was the Oregon 12 men on the field penalty. A couple plays that have had some narrative around them since that game, and will probably be something that people are talking about again in the lead up to the Rose Bowl. While everyone else is trying to relive things, Ryan Day said, I thought this was interesting. You're not taking what they did worked well against Tennessee and going, well, this is going to work well against Oregon as well. The phrase he used in terms of the game plan for Oregon was, we're starting from scratch.
I think you have to do that in order to, in some ways, just like the CFP committee, Tom. It's a blank sheet of paper each week, but I think
whose sheet is more blank, the coaching staff or the college football playoff committee? And when you say the coaching staff, please mention which coaching staff you mean.
Yeah, no, I think what you maybe don't want to do is get into some assumptions And so, you know, everything that you've done that you do well and you can do. So that's all part of the game plan. But then I think maybe the no assumptions thing or the blank sheet is more about how it's going to operate against Oregon and what to expect from Oregon and what Oregon is going to do. I think if you go with you certainly, Tom, some of that defensive game plan needs to be not just a blank sheet. Like that sheet needs to go into the fireplace and never be seen again. So yeah, in that regard, it should start blank. Offensively, I think it's blank from that Oregon game, the previous Oregon game, because this is a different offensive line, and it's going to be a different running game. I think the passing game, don't get rid of too much of that, you know, that passing attack, because I think it went well against Oregon and will continue to go well. So starting from scratch, sure, but all of the ingredients are laid out. You know, like you know how to bake this cake, and just because you're making it from scratch, like you're pretty good at that, and you know how to make it all. It's certainly better than going and buying the cake from the previous Oregon game.
Having your ingredients laid out, Tony, that's known as your mise en place, or
Exactly.
your mise in the kitchen. That is definitely a phrase I was not expecting to say today, at least on this show. And here we are. So let's real quickly hit a couple things from Dan Lanning's side of things, and then we can talk about a couple bigger picture things as well. The first thing was he was asked about the different travel schedule for the Rose Bowl this year. Normally, the Big Ten and the Pac-12, RIP, teams head out there on Christmas Day, maybe the 26th, and you have your day at Disneyland, and then you do the Lowry's Beef Bowl one day. This is a business trip. It is a much shorter trip than normal. And what I thought was really interesting was if it was up to Dan Lanning, very clearly it would be an even shorter trip than it is.
Yeah, he'd like to make it just a regular road game, basically, in terms of you get there the day before. This one, what they're getting on there on the 20, both teams arriving on the 29th, the Ohio State the evening of the 29th. So it's still a remarkably quick turnaround. But I think the media and getting a practice out there in and sort of just a couple of days of acclimation, like that's going to delay things for Dan Lanning. But he would like to just get there on whatever the Friday would be, like the 31st. Get there, play the game on the first, go home, and be back in bed before you know it. So it's just a little bit different than that, but it's also much different than a regular bowl game, because we know like it's a long trip. We'd be out there, just us. We'd be out there for maybe 7-8 days before we get home, and this one is just 3 or 4 days shorter than that.
Yeah, noticeably shorter. We're not flying out on Christmas, which is nice. But it is, it's still, much longer than a typical road trip for us or road game for us. So little different.
How different is it from our Oregon game? Because we went out there on a Thursday and came back on a Monday.
Yeah. Yes. Left on a Thursday and came back on Monday. And so this will be similar. It's going to be, and that was, that got us out of our normal rhythm. And you sort of, when you travel, you sort of feel that. I mean, if you're on you normally travel for work and you're normally gone Monday to Wednesday or something like that. If you're, I know someone who is a nurse and does like a traveling nurse kind of thing. And she's, has a normal rhythm to her week. And then every once in a while it's like, oh, schedule's a little different this week. And it really kind of messes with you. You get in the nice normal rhythms. And then it's like, whoa, I'm supposed to be home by now. And then you're not. So I understand where Dan Lanning's coming from on that one. Send us a quick super chat from TK. The Tennessee Advanced Scouting Report by the Huddle was impressive. You guys had them measured quite well. And we are going to try and do the same thing with Oregon this week. And the key is you got to watch the games. You got to watch the whole games, watch games where they play well, watch games where they play not well. And then you sort of know, here's what's good, here's what's bad. And you also, by the time we've watched 4 or 5 games of a team in a season, you have a pretty good sense for, hey, this is a one-off problem. Hey, this is a consistent problem. The first game we watched was for Oregon, other than the Michigan and Ohio State games, which we've already watched, was the Wisconsin game. And it's like, boy, this offense really bogged down. It's like, well, they didn't have Tez Johnson, who's by far their leading receiver this year. That probably factors into it a little bit. We'll get into this in much more detail, but this is wild to me. I went in thinking, okay, 16-13. We listened to this game on the radio on the way back from the Northwestern game in Chicago. And I thought, okay, boy, we're going to really learn something about the Oregon offense. I came in with more opinions on the Oregon defense than I did on the Oregon offense in a game where it was 16-13, and it wasn't necessarily like good things about the Oregon defense. So we'll talk about that much more. That'll be a Buckeye Weekly podcast episode. We'll try and record that a little later on today. We've talked about this a couple other times on different shows, but our plan for this week is to try and get as much as done as we can as early as possible, because we know a lot of you guys are traveling and you need stuff to listen to in the car or on the airplane. Believe me, no one is more sympathetic to, hey, you may have a long time in an airport or a long flight across the country or whatever it is than we are. We're going to be right there with you a little later on in the week. So I'm going to try and get you as much as we can early in the week. And then, of course, as soon as Christmas is over, we're going to be back at it, because we have a busy schedule in Columbus with interviews, get a chance to watch the practice, and then fly out to California. And then we're going to have a real fire drill of a few days in California. So there'll be plenty of content for you, but we do appreciate the kind words, and we'll look to continue to live up to that standard this week as well.
Can I did want to apologize. I went back and I looked at our game picks, and somehow, and typing out my score, which was, I typed out 24-17 Ohio State, the 4 and the 2 got transposed. So I just wanted to apologize for that. That was that's a editing error. That was my fault. I should have reread that, but I'm not surprised that I got it exactly correct on that score based on watching the 4 or 5 Tennessee games this year.
Yeah, I failed to account for the quality of competition they were apparently facing in conference, but you live, you learn, you move on. We will see. And, I'm going to be so interested to see what this next Ohio State-Oregon game looks like, because I think it's going to be similar in some ways and very different in other ways. And I mean, we'll get into that later. I did want to talk to you one last thing about the Dan Lanning press conference that I thought was interesting. And I thought, I don't know if you're telling me the truth right now, sir. Dan Lanning's reaction when he saw Ohio State's name come up on the bracket as a potential second round matchup for the number 1 team in the country, which is theoretically being rewarded with a nice, easy path as the number 1 team in the country.
I think the first words were super excited. And I'm not sure if that, he said playing against great teams is what this is all about. Now, the truth is, he did say the path to the end is tough, which that's for everybody. So if you're going to get there, you're going to have to play some teams. But as Ryan Day said, it's nice to have a win already under your belt in the playoffs. It's nice to be 1-0 in the playoffs and build that confidence, and to have your first game. And we said it after the game for Oregon, to be an underdog betting wise, like that's an issue in seeding. And we don't know that it's going to be corrected anytime soon. I think, well, has to be, and we talked about this as well, it has to be corrected via a unanimous decision in terms of giving the automatic berths a bye. I don't think you need that same sort of sweeping change to be like, okay, we don't need to hold up the conference championship game losers above teams that beat them with the same records, because there are all of these uneven scheduling. Like, we don't need to. We can change that, because it's not even a change. We can just not hold them up like that, and then let things fall where they may, and that would alleviate some issues. It doesn't alleviate the big issue of the buys that lower ranked programs are getting. I'll say that.
And I talked about this on our post-game show. I got a chance to chat with someone who is close to the college football playoff folks and asked, hey, looking at the first round games, and let's center this conversation around the fact that the semifinal games under the 4-team format were decided by an average of 18 points a game, and then the first round games were decided by 19 points a game this year in the 12-team format. So it's not like this is a brand new thing, but as you're looking at how might they adapt things moving forward, I asked the guy, what is the process to potentially make a change? We know there's going to be big changes again in 2026, so not this coming year, but next year. A year from now, 14 months from now, there are going to be big changes coming when they potentially, because the existing contracts will end then, and then you can, as Ryan Day and the committee love to do, start with a fresh sheet of paper, start from scratch, and you don't need to adapt something that's already in existence. Next year for 2025, is there a way they could change the format? Could they change that, that it's not just the conference champions who get first round buys? Could they tweak something else? And the guy said, yes, you could do that. There is a process to do that. However, that process involves a unanimous vote of all of the stakeholders. So the SEC and the Big Ten would have to do that, and they would probably be happy to do that. Notre Dame would probably be happy to do that. The Big 12, the ACC, some of the other smaller conferences, probably not as happy to do that. They're going to probably be happy to take their first round buys as long as they can get them. So that's probably not going to happen. So the answer is theoretically there could be a change. Yes. Will there be a change? Almost certainly not. You're going to have to wait for 2026 for that kind of a change. One last thing before we move on to if we have any questions and start getting ready to wrap up. There were questions for both Ryan Day and Dan Lanning about the transfer portal and high school recruiting, and two guys who are both recruiting at a very, very high level, both top 5 classes again this year, and plenty of transfer portal additions, perhaps another one on the way for Ohio State soon. But they were both asked, how do you balance bringing guys and, prioritizing high school recruiting versus transfer portal additions? And, it was sort of, as you would expect, similar answers, but not exactly the same.
Yeah, right. They said you're always going to build from high school and develop and retain those guys. And then there is attrition. So as you're losing guys from the portal, you're going to add from the portal. And if you're losing guys early, then you're going to try to fill up the areas of need. So it's a supplemental thing, which is what we've always talked about. I thought it was interesting. The question to Dan Lanning was also about the footprint that he had at Georgia and the footprint that you have at Oregon. And one of the things that he said is, are you looking for the best opportunity or the easiest opportunity? And it's like, how do you get people to come west? Well, you've got to identify the people who are comfortable with going to the best fit for them, he said. Now, based on what we've seen, Oregon is going to stick with high school recruiting because they're very darn good at it. But also, based on what we've seen, Oregon is also going to be heavy in the transfer portal because they are very good at it. And then also he had another interesting question about, hey, what's going on with your junior college players who have come here, because they now could potentially legally have some additional years of eligibility if the courts hold up the idea that there's an injunction right now that JUCO years don't count towards your NCAA eligibility, which I think is a very much a farce to give them extra years when they've already been in college. But he's like, yeah, we haven't really talked about that yet. And he also didn't feel like that was going to go anywhere or last. But again, it starts with high school recruiting, as we've seen with Oregon and Ohio State battling quite a bit over the last couple of years. But also, as we see Ohio State and Oregon battling quite a bit in the transfer portal. That's I think it's interesting to watch, because at some point it feels like Oregon is just glomming up. We'll take it all. And we know that that's great in theory, but it has not necessarily worked. It hasn't worked for Texas A&M. It hasn't worked for Miami in that realm. I think Oregon is better equipped because I think their foundation is better and it's more real. And so they can do more with it. And, the question of, can you buy a championship? I don't want to say Oregon's buying a championship. I think they're putting they're spending their money in a very good way, kind of like Ohio State has.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of, if you're a baseball team, are you doing it like the Dodgers where, you're spending a bunch of money and you're also putting in, you also have a really smart infrastructure in place? Or are you doing it like let's be charitable and say just the early 90s Mets, and are you spending a bunch of money and not putting a lot of thought into that? And there's a different piece of that. And if you look at Oregon, and boy, if you have a conversation with an Oregon fan, if you even mention Phil Knight, either throw up your dukes or throw up your arms and
or throw up.
Say not in the face, because you're going to get a reaction, because I don't know why. Obviously when recruits are talking about the fact that he's going to give them a shoe deal, he probably played a role in this in some way. You don't have to pretend he didn't. I also like the will Oregon be able to buy a championship, or will Ohio State, who everyone has been saying is trying to buy a championship, be able to deny them that? And, and then what's the narrative around that?
But you have not heard the only team that you've heard a price tag on in the last 2 years, I think, is Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
When it was Ryan Day talking about $13 million to retain a roster, that was 2023. Now the $20 million thing gets out there. It's amazing that nobody else is spending any money on players. And as Day said, he even addressed it. He kind of went head on with it today, talking about there's been a lot of talk about Ohio State's NIL on this team. That's a majority of just retention, paying the players that have come back and rewarding those players, as opposed to however much they've spent to bring in seven transfers. Like, it's the numbers that get thrown out for Ohio State, and it's like they're the only team paying anything. And if there are no numbers thrown out by Oregon for Oregon this year and next, then I would be surprised. But also, the number that was thrown out for Ohio State was thrown out by the athletic director. So if you don't do that, then there's no tag associated with it. And once you put a number on it, then you've got to own it, and people are going to just throw it on there, and it's going to be attached literally as a tag. A literal price tag, Tom, will be put on your team. So don't put it out there.
Yeah, I think that was probably a little bit of a strategic error, because you put that out there and then you just go ahead and put the bullseye right around that, because that's where everyone's going to be firing at that point. Let's hit one real quick one from Jeff Frazier, and then we're going to wrap up, because we got a Kevin Noon Big Me kickoff show coming up relatively shortly. Jeff Frazier says, if Tennessee was a 5th-rated defense, where is Oregon? So I pulled up some national stats from CFBstats.com. National leaders in scoring defense: Ohio State first overall right now at 11.4 points per game. Tennessee now number 7 in the country at 16.1 points per game. And Oregon is number 12 at 17.8 points per game. So very similar there. All three of those teams saw those numbers go up in their last games. Ohio State just up a little bit. Tennessee's up quite a bit, and Oregon's up quite a bit as well after the Big Ten championship game. In terms of rush defense, yards per carry, Ohio State 5th nationally, 2.94 yards per carry. Tennessee 7th nationally, 2.97 yards per carry. Oregon 55th, 4.01 yards per carry. That's one to keep an eye on. And as terms of pass defense, Ohio State number 2 nationally in yards per attempt, 5.6. Tennessee is, I may have to control F, 32, 32nd, 6.5 yards per attempt. Oregon 6th there, 5.8 yards per attempt. So just if you're looking at a per play, per carry, per attempt basis, Oregon substantially better against the pass than against the run. And yes, there was people asking about the all right, I'm contractually obligated to say Market X is Oregon passing out those Bobby Bonilla contracts. Yes, that's look at me, I'm so owned. Hate it. Anyway, doesn't matter. And there are folks asking, it is going to be Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit on the call for the Rose Bowl. If you want to hear our thoughts on Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit and ESPN, and really the college football media on the whole, and really the media on the whole, we did a show that dropped last night, Sunday night, talking all about, okay, why did you see what you see and hear what you heard on the first round college playoff games, and in terms of who's getting promoted and whose big losses count for more than others, and whose big losses are a damning indictment of the entire region of the country, and whose are just, hey, listen, one man's failings. We did a whole show on that. You can find that on the Buckeye Weekly podcast feed or on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Those are both going to be great places all week long for you, as well as the Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning feed and all of the Buckeye Huddle podcast feeds. We're going to have a ton of content coming up this week in the lead up to the Rose Bowl. Plenty of stuff for you, as we said, before Christmas, so we can try and get a lot of the big picture stuff out there before we head out to California. And then we'll have, after Christmas, we'll have a couple days in Columbus doing some interviews, go and see some practice, and much, much more. And then head out there, Buckeyes heading out there on the 29th, a full media day on the 30th, head coach press conference on the 31st, and then the game on the 1st. And then after that, well, one of these teams is going to be headed to the Cotton Bowl. The other one is going to be headed home and probably have a bunch of really surly fans, not particularly thrilled with the fact that their season is ending on New Year's Day. But which one will it be? Well, we will all find out together on New Year's Day, Rose Bowl, 5 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. We'll be there. hopefully many of you guys will be as well. Once again, I will recommend, if you have the opportunity, you should go. It is an awesome experience every time at the Rose Bowl. So that will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.